Be the Talk, episode 200, featuring Azim Khamisa. Welcome to Be the Talk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Azim Khamisa. Azim, are you ready to talk?
I am ready to talk, Nathan.
Azim Khamisa is an inspiration. Hailed by dignitaries such as the Dalai Lama, former President Bill Clinton, and Vice President Al Gore, Azim carries his inspirational message of forgiveness, peace, and hope into a world in desperate need of each. Following the loss of his only son, Tariq, in 1995 to a senseless gang-related murder, Azim chose the path of forgiveness and compassion rather than revenge and bitterness. And this amazing choice led to the establishment of the Tariq Khamisa Foundation and the subsequent forgiveness movement, which has reached millions. Azim Khamisa, welcome to the talk.
Thank you, Nathan.
Your TED Talk is called What Comes After Tragedy? Forgiveness. And so many amazing things about this talk. There are all kinds of victims on both sides of the tragedy, and that was an awareness that came to you after you practiced meditation that day. Ironically, I'm just kind of doing the spoiler alert just for the sake of the limited time that we have. You gave this talk with the father of the individual who actually murdered your son, your only son, and he was also meditating, and you were able to connect with this person eventually through your shared practice of meditation, even though you're from completely different faiths. So there's a lot of deep stuff in this talk. Please take us behind your talk, Azim.
Yeah, well, I was with the grandfather of my son's killer. We've been together for 23 years. But he was like a father to him because the kid who killed my son, Tony, lived with his grandfather and calls him daddy. But basically what you said is correct, that sometimes in deep trauma and tragedy, there is a spark of clarity. If you think about it, every saint has suffered the dark night of the soul. And the deep clarity in my tragedy after I found out that my son had been shot and killed at a young age of 20 by a 14-year-old gang member in a senseless random. He was a student at San Diego State University and worked weekends as a pizza delivery man and was lured to a bogus address in a gang initiation. And of course, it brought my world to a crashing halt. And I remember when I got the news, I was in my kitchen. I lost strength in both of my legs as I collapsed to the floor, hit my head against the refrigerator and curled up in a ball. I mean, I've never experienced traumatic pain like that. It's extremely complex to lose a child. And I had my first out-of-body experience because I couldn't be in my body. And I've read sometimes when victims go through deep trauma, they actually do leave their body because they can't be in there. And I practice as a Sufi Muslim. I meditate 2 hours a day. I believe in God, and I believe I went into his loving embrace. And I don't remember how long I was gone. It seemed like a long time. It was like a nuclear bomb that had exploded in my heart. And then when the explosion subsided, God sent me back with the wisdom that there are victims on both ends of the gun. And that did not come from my intellect or my loving heart, but rather it was a download from a higher power. And there's a great quote by, Henry David Thoreau, one of my favorite philosophers, says it doesn't matter what you look at. What matters is what you see. And what I was able to see is that there were victims at both ends of the gun. And that eventually led me to forgive my son's killer, start the Tariq Khamisa Foundation, which is named after my son. And our mission is to stop kids from killing kids by breaking the cycle of youth violence And essentially have three mandates. First and foremost is to save lives of children. As you know, we lose so many on a daily basis. Just in the first 4 months of 2018, there's been over 20 school shootings. Our second mandate is to empower the right choices so they don't fall to the crack and choose lives of gangs and drugs and alcohol and weapons. And our third choice is to teach the principles of nonviolence, of empathy, of compassion, of forgiveness, of peacemaking, because peacemaking is a proactive effort. And I started with a very simple premise that violence is a learned behavior. If you accept that as a truism, nonviolence can also be a learned behavior, but you have to teach it because kids are not going to learn this from osmosis. So with the grace of God, the foundation has been very successful. We will be finishing our 23rd year in October of this year. And we've created a safe school model, which has 4 different programs. First one is a live assembly with the grandfather and me, and we're introduced. This man's grandson killed this man's son, and here they are together. He's African American, my roots are Eastern, he's Christian, I'm Muslim. So we transcend all the possible isms. And then because it's a very emotional assembly, so then we essentially do a debrief with the students of how to manage your emotions in a healthy way. And then we have an in-classroom curriculum, which is 10 weeks after the assembly. We create a peace club on campus. And then we have a mentoring program for the challenging kids. And we have amazing results. In 2 years, we get rid of the gangs. We improve the SAT scores. We improve attendance in schools. And we teach how to deal with emotions in a positive way. But the biggest result that we've been able to produce is we cut expulsions and suspensions by 70%.
70, not 17, but the big 70.
70.
70.
Yeah,
wow.
It's huge because if you expel or suspend a kid, guess where he ends up in? In a gang and then eventually in the juvenile justice system. So it's working. We have several schools waiting for our program. And my challenge now is to, I spend as much time raising donations and money because we work in inner city schools that don't have the money. So we bring our programs for free. And so we can only go to so many. But it is my hope that someday the Department of Education, either at the state level or the federal level, will see the benefits of our programs and fund it. Because if you look at the math, it costs $10,000 a year to provide free public education in America. Varies a couple thousand here or there. It costs $140,000 a year to incarcerate a youth for 1 year in the state of California. It costs the school $50 a kid to bring our safe school model. So the math works, but it's still difficult to get it through the legal political process. So that's kind of my goal. We've already created what I call a viable and an affordable solution to curb youth violence. So now my big challenge in the next 5 years is to see if I can get public funding for it.
Azim, right before we were about to pivot over to the Blitz round to talk actually about the mechanics behind your talk, but before we do that, I wanted to ask your input on this. I love towards the end of your talk, you talk about goodwill leads to friendship, which leads to trust, which can lead to empathy, which can lead to compassion, and that ultimately leads to peace. Is that a progression that you saw as part of this kind of out-of-body experience, or is that something that you've found through experience as you've worked through this program in the schools?
Yes, it's the later. Obviously, I had no clue everything that has manifested in my life as a result of the choice I made 23 years ago to forgive rather than seek the path of retribution and revenge. So I've written 4 books, but my first 3 books are like a trilogy. The first one is From Murder to Forgiveness, which I wrote 3 years after I lost my son. Then a few years later, I followed with a sequel, From Forgiveness to Fulfillment, because the work that I've done in the aftermath of my son's tragedy has been very meaningful and fulfilling. I've given over 1,000 school presentations worldwide, over 1 million kids. I got over 100,000 letters from kids, so I know that they are listening.
100,000 letters.
Yes, over
Wow.
100,000. And then I finished the trilogy about 2 years ago, which is From Fulfillment to Peace. So it was a progression. And the quote that you just quoted, that is at the end of my TED Talk, is the basis of my last book, which is From Fulfillment to Peace. And I essentially have written the book based on that, on the finish of the TED Talk.
So we are talking with Azim Khamisa. He is a TED alumni, and his talk is called What Comes After Tragedy? Forgiveness. We're going to be back with Azim Khamisa in just a moment for the Blitz Round. People ask, how could I start a 7-day-a-week podcast? It's because of what I've learned from my mentors. Some of the best mentors in history aren't around anymore. They've left hours of one-on-one mentoring behind in their books. Each month at Classics on Tap, I record a new chapter from a classic business book to help you make a difference. Download your first chapter at classicsontap.com. And we're back with TED alumni Azim Khamisa. It's time for the Blitz Round. This is when I am going to ask Azim a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and actual performance of his recent TED Talk, which actually is happened less than a year ago as of the time of this recording. Azim, are you ready to go?
Sure.
All right. Well, first question, and I think I know the way that this works with TED. Were you selected to speak? I believe they all are, or did you apply?
No, actually, I was selected.
Mm-hmm.
There was a platform where they were talking about partners. There's an organization called Plus Wonder, and Jean Olewang is the executive director. And they've looked at 50 partnerships, and Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, Desmond Tutu and Leah, Ben and Jerry, Richard Branson and his fellow. They picked me and the grandfather because they're showing the power of partnerships. So at the TED Women Conference in New Orleans, Jean Olewang led a segment of there were like 30 speakers, and she had about 5 speakers that were all partners. So she essentially championed us to be at the TED Women Talk in New Orleans.
Okay. So, and you gave the talk with Felix, who's the grandfather of the other individual. Were you, did you memorize, did you improvise, or did you blend in order to prepare for this?
The TED Talk is very structured.
Okay.
And, they want a written version of your talk. They want you to stay on message. We had a kind of a webinar on the computer before we go to New Orleans. We were coached in New Orleans. Amazing team. I was very, very impressed with the TED team. And then we had a dress rehearsal before our talk. And then, of course, we did our talk. So I speak a lot. I've given, as I said, over 1,000 school presentations, over 600 keynotes. So my challenge is to make sure the content is right. So the biggest challenge was to try and do what we did in 13 minutes. I didn't think that was possible. Because, typically when I do a keynote, I get an hour, sometimes get with the Q&As an hour and a half. So that was a challenge, but they helped us through it. I left with a tremendous amount of respect for the TED team.
What's a tip, a technique, or a tool that helped you prepare, other than their guidelines that you've mentioned?
I think the one thing that I took away from the TED Talk, which actually is helping me communicate in other talks I do, is they want you to stay on message. So to give you an example, one of the lines they took out that I just shared with you was that every saint has suffered the dark night of the soul. They took that line out. And I agreed that they took it out because when I say that, your mind goes away from me to your favorite saint. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does.
So they're very much about your message. They don't want you to bring in outside people. So if you are giving some advice to people that maybe are future TED Talk, TED Talk candidates, then one advice I would give them is to hone your message so that the entire focus of the entire message is on you and your message, and not to bring in third parties.
We've been talking.
Actually, it's a good way to communicate.
Oh, it absolutely is. We've been talking with Azim Khamisa. His TED Talk is What Comes After Tragedy? Forgiveness. And if you want to see that talk, other than typing it in old-fashioned way into YouTube, you can go to our show notes page over at BeTheTalk.com. We want you to check out this powerful, powerful talk. And we also want you to visit Azim at his website. It's azimkhamisa.com, AZIMKHAMISA, azimkhamisa.com. And in a moment, we'll be back with Azim Khamisa for the final word of advice for Talk Universe. Everyone wants to change the world, but not everyone knows the first step. Before you can change the world with your talk, it has to be selected. So grab the templates, timelines, and tools that I use to get my talk selected at BeTheTalk.com. And we're back with Azim Khamisa. It's time for the final word of advice.
Well, I think that the end of my talk is really what I would like to repeat, and that is to say that forgiveness is not very well understood. It is something you do for yourself, and the portal for me to go from tragedy of losing my only son to a level of peace that I feel today, the portal was forgiveness. And as I said in my talk, that sustained goodwill creates friendship, sustained friendship creates trust, sustained trust creates empathy, sustained empathy creates compassion, and sustained compassion creates peace. So I call that my peace formula. But people always ask me, how do you extend goodwill to the person who murdered your child? I tell them, you do that through forgiveness. As is evident, it worked for me. It worked for my family. What I believe is a miracle, it worked for him. And it worked for his family. It can work for you and all of your listeners and viewers and their families. It can work for Israel and Palestine, North and South Korea. Hopefully we are getting some progress there. It can work for Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, and Iraq. It can work for the US of A. So it can work for the planet. So let me just say that peace is possible. How do I know that? Because I am at peace.
Azim Khamisa, thank you so much for carving out time in your schedule to come on the talk and share your wisdom with Talk Universe today.
Well, you're welcome, Nathan. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Be The Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.